You're throwing your life away. That is what my mother said the night I told her I was marrying Marcus. Not congratulations. Not what is he like, or when will we meet him, or even give me a moment. Just that sentence, tight and final, the kind a person stores behind their teeth for years until they find the right occasion to release it. I was 26 years old. I had driven 4 hours from Nashville to Harlan to sit across from my parents at the kitchen table, where I had eaten every meal of my childhood, and I had shown my mother a photograph of the man I had spent 2 years loving. Her first question was not about his character or his laugh or how he looked at me. It was about his race. And when I told her the answer she had already guessed from the photograph, she set it face down on the table and said those 8 words like they settled something permanent. You're throwing your life away. I have carried that sentence for 9 years, and I want you to hold it too, because the morning my mother appeared at my front door, she did not bring an apology, she brought demands. What she came to ask for, and what I said in return, none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, the place where we spend our evenings with quiet people and the choices that came to define them. If you have ever stood in front of your family with the person you loved and watched them look away instead of toward you, this one is for you tonight. Stay close, because the thing my mother came to demand 9 years later is not the thing you are picturing right now, and the way it ended is not what I expected either. Leave a word in the comments and hit subscribe if you have not yet. Now let us go back to the beginning. I grew up in Harlan, which is a small town in eastern Tennessee that smells like pine resin and fry grease, and the inside of a church, which is also about the right description for how the people there tend to think. My father Earl and my mother Gloria ran the hardware store that Earl's own father had opened in 1968, and they had 2 children. My brother Darren and me. We were not wealthy. We were what Harlan called settled, meaning we owned what we had, we sat in the same 3 pews at First Baptist every Sunday, and we did not ask strangers for anything, and we did not draw attention to ourselves, and that was the shape of a life. That was the whole of it. I was not a rebel. I want to say that clearly because the story people expect, when they hear how this begins, involves a teenager with a manifesto, a girl who spent high school in combat against everything her parents stood for. That was not me. I was the one who kept her room clean, got the good grades, stayed so carefully inside the lines that sometimes I could not find them anymore for all the care I took around them. I loved Harlan the way you love the place that made you. Imperfectly, with full knowledge of its limits. I left it at 22 for a nursing program at a state school in Nashville, and that is where the shape of my ordinary life changed. I met Marcus Dawes in a hospital cafeteria on a Tuesday in March when I was 24. He was a cardiology resident. He had coffee in one hand and a bag of almonds in the other, and he was reading a patient chart with the concentration of a man who found charts genuinely interesting. I know that sounds like a small thing to notice, but Marcus was interested in everything. Every patient file, every piece of data, every conversation he walked into. He listened the way most people only listen when they are preparing to disagree. I had never experienced being listened to that completely. We talked for 40 minutes in that cafeteria about a paper he was reading. I knew almost nothing about cardiology, and it did not matter at all. We dated for 2 years. His mother Celestine had us for Sunday dinners most weeks at her house in East Nashville, and those dinners were the first time I understood that a family could be loud and warm at the same time, without the loud part being something to brace for. At the Dawes table, noise meant presence. People talked over each other about things they cared about, and nobody went to the garage afterward to be alone. At the Hartley table, noise meant something was about to go wrong. I took Marcus home to Harlan in the fall of our first year together. I told myself it would be fine. My parents were practical people, good people. They would see what I saw. I had never tested what kind of people they were, not on anything that cost them, not on anything that required them to be broader than their comfort. I would learn that week that comfort and goodness are not always the same thing. My father shook Marcus's hand without looking him in the eye. My mother made dinner and talked around him for 2 hours, as though a very polite shadow had joined us at the table. She asked me about my nursing program 3 times. She did not ask Marcus a single thing. After dinner, my father invented a reason to be in the garage. My mother invented a reason to be in the kitchen. On the drive back to Nashville, Marcus went quiet in the way he did when he was thinking something he was not yet certain how to say. After a while, he asked if the evening had gone the way I expected. I said, yes. We drove the rest of the way without much conversation because we both knew what yes meant. We got engaged the following spring. I drove to Harlan alone to tell my parents. I sat at the same kitchen table and showed my mother the ring. She picked up the photograph I had brought because I thought it might help to have his face in the room. She set it face down. And she said the sentence I have already told you. I drove home in the dark. I cried for about 30 minutes, somewhere around mile marker 47. And then I stopped. Because I had made my decision, and crying after a decision is different from crying before one. One is grief. The other is theater. Marcus and I were married on a Saturday in early June in a botanical garden in Nashville. 63 people came. His family arrived in numbers, cousins and aunts and people who had known him since he was 8 years old and could not stop saying so. From my side, no one made the drive. Not my parents. Not Darren. Not a single aunt or uncle or cousin who had grown up at the same Sunday dinner table as me. One person from the Hartley side sent a gift. That was my grandfather, Chester Hartley, my father's father, who was 81 years old with bad knees and lived alone in the farmhouse 20 minutes outside of Harlan, where my father had grown up. He could not make the drive. He sent a card instead, in the handwriting I recognized from birthday checks going back to childhood. It said, Simone, I am sorry I cannot make the drive. I am proud of you and I hope he is good to you. That is the only thing that matters. I put the card in my wallet that night and kept it there. At the reception, Marcus's grandmother Marvell, who was 92 and small as a child, and the sharpest person in any room she occupied, took my hands in both of hers and pressed a cedar box into them before I could say a word. It was the size of a shoebox, worn smooth at the corners, with brass hinges and a small brass latch. Inside were recipe cards in at least 4 different handwritings, going back 60 years, written on everything from index cards to the backs of paper bags. Marvel's biscuit recipe was written on the reverse of a 1979 electric bill. She held my hands and said simply, everything important in this family lives in here. I thanked her and meant it. I set the box on our kitchen counter when we got home that night. Years passed, and it stayed. I passed it every morning on my way to the coffee maker. Rue, our oldest, learned the biscuit recipe at 7. Callie, our younger, preferred the sweet potato pie. The cedar box became part of the shape of the kitchen, the way things become when they are loved and ordinary and always present. I did not think of it as important, it just sat there, holding what it was holding, waiting to matter. The disownment was not dramatic. I want to be clear about that, because when people hear the word they picture something cinematic, a door slamming, voices raised. Some final confrontation that at least has the decency to be memorable. What we received was silence. Silence, and then a phone call from my father 3 weeks after the wedding. He called from the store phone, not the house phone, which told me my mother did not know he was calling. He said my name. Then he said, your mother and I have prayed on this and we love you. But we cannot be part of this marriage. We cannot. I asked him to be specific about what he meant by cannot. He paused for a long time. When he spoke again, he used a word I had not let myself fully expect. He said marriage the way people in small places sometimes say it, like a category with a right answer and a wrong one, and he had decided I had chosen wrong. When I said his name quietly, giving him one more opening, he said, I'm sorry, Simone. I am truly sorry. And then he hung up the store phone. That was it. No ceremony. No fireworks. Just a Tuesday afternoon call and then nothing. The nothing held. Thanksgiving came and went without a word. Christmas, too. I sent cards and received nothing back. One evening in the new year, I searched for my mother's Facebook page, the one she used to post church photos and garden pictures and recipes she had tried, and found that she had removed me. Her own daughter. I noticed it the way you notice the absence of something you thought would always be there. I put the phone down and made coffee and did not cry. I was getting better at not crying. Or maybe I was getting tired. Darren called in February. He called to tell me Mom was having a hard time, by which he meant she had decided her grief about my marriage was its own condition, and she was making sure the family bore witness to it. He did not ask how I was doing. He asked whether I had thought about coming home and talking to them. I told him I was not the one who had stopped talking. He said he understood, and that it was a hard situation, and that he was caught in the middle. He did not call again for a long time. The middle, I learned, is a place some people choose to stay indefinitely, because it costs them nothing. My grandfather Chester called me on my birthday in August. He was the only family member who did. He called the same date every year, always from the store, I realized later, always on the store phone, because that way the bill would not appear on the house account. He talked about the garden and the neighbor's dog and the book he was working through, and he made me laugh 3 times without trying. He never mentioned my parents, and I never asked him to. Before he hung up, he said what he always said. "You sound good, Simone. Keep sounding good." I told him I would. The absence of my blood family had a specific texture. Not sharp the way I expected. Dull, more like a place where a tooth has been pulled, that the tongue keeps visiting anyway, out of habit, long after there is nothing there to find. I kept reaching for the phone on Sunday afternoons and then remembering. My parents had known me longer than anyone on earth. Without them, I had to learn how to be Simone again, without the mirror of them, which turned out to be the hardest and eventually the best thing that ever happened to me. What held me together was Celestine. Celestine Dawes is a small woman with large opinions and a laugh that takes up an entire room. She was a retired school principal who gardened in combat boots and had read more books than anyone I had ever met and was not interested in wasting the years she had left on what other people thought she should do. She took me in the way she did everything, without announcement. Without making it significant, just by including me in the steady rhythm of her life until I was simply part of it. Sunday dinners became the spine of my week. She called on Tuesdays to argue about whatever she was reading. When I passed my nursing boards on the second try, she bought a cake with my name written in pink icing and made Marcus sing, which he genuinely cannot do. And she did not mind one bit. I need to be honest with you about something. I grew up in a house where love had very specific conditions, a long list of things that could violate them, and a clear understanding that love could be withdrawn if the conditions were not met. I had not known until Celestine that a family could operate without that list. I kept waiting for it to appear, for the conditions to be named, for the moment when I would do or say or be the wrong thing, and the warmth would go measured and careful. It never happened. It took me 2 or 3 years to stop bracing for it, and by then I was already something I had not been before. I was a person who believed she was worth the trouble of being loved without the asterisk. If you have ever had someone love you the way you needed to be loved, after a season of being loved only on terms, leave a word in the comments. I read every one and I will know exactly what you mean. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because the part where my mother comes back into this story is not what you're expecting, and I want you there for it. Now, back to it. Marcus and I built our life with the kind of steady intention that is less romantic than it sounds, and more sustaining. He finished his residency and joined a cardiology practice north of Nashville. I moved into neonatal nursing, which is the kind of work that makes you very clear-eyed about what is fragile and what is not. We saved money carefully and bought a house in a school district we had researched. We had a yard big enough for a swing set and a vegetable garden we always meant to expand, and never quite did. Rue came when I was 28. She arrived with a firm opinion about everything and has maintained one on every subject since. Callie came 2 years after, quieter, steadier, the kind of child who stares at something until she understands it completely and then never forgets. They grew up calling Celestine Grandma Celestine and Marcus's sister Lena Auntie Lena, and they learned the cedar box recipe by recipe. They knew it as Nana Marvel's box, because even after Marvel passed at 986, the box stayed on our counter, and they understood it belonged to the family, that it was the kind of object that outlives the person and keeps carrying them forward. My grandfather Chester died in the winter when Rue was 3. He was 84. He went quietly in his own bed, which was exactly what he would have wanted. Darren texted me on a Sunday morning, "Granddad passed this morning. Thought you should know." 8 words that echoed, though he didn't know it, the 8 words my mother had used in a kitchen 3 years before. I thought about going to Harlan for the service. I thought hard about it. I had a sick 3-year-old and a 1-year-old who was not yet sleeping through the night, and a husband covering a 24-hour shift. The family at that funeral had not been glad for me at my own wedding. I did not go. I am not fully at peace with that. But I know that Chester knew I loved him. He had called me every birthday on the store phone, so it would not appear on the house account. He had sent the card. I told myself the card was enough. I still tell myself that. No one told me about the will. That is the part I did not know. I would not know it for 4 more years, and when I did learn it, the information would not arrive from a letter or a lawyer. It would come from my mother's own mouth, on my porch, delivered as a demand she had not yet understood she was handing me along with everything else. In the 5th year of our marriage, Rue asked me at the dinner table why we did not have grandparents on my side like her friends did. She was 7, and she asked it the way children ask things they sense might cause pain, carefully, watching my face. Marcus looked at his plate. I looked at her and told her the truth in the smallest version I could make it fit into. I told her I had parents and a brother in Tennessee, but that we did not see them. She asked why. I told her that sometimes grown-ups make choices that are hard to undo and that it had nothing to do with her. She considered this, and said okay, and went back to her dinner with the equanimity of a child who has decided the adult world is strange, but survivable. That night after the girls were asleep, I wrote my parents a letter. A real one, handwritten on paper, because email felt too easy to delete. I wrote it carefully. I told them I had 2 daughters and gave them their names and their ages and one specific detail about each one, the kind of thing you tell someone so they can start to picture a person. I enclosed 2 photographs. I did not apologize. I had nothing to apologize for. But I said I believed people could change their minds, and that I hoped they might be willing to try, and that my door was open. I mailed it on a Tuesday. I waited 3 weeks and received nothing. Then 6 weeks. Then 9. I told myself I had expected this. I almost believed it. In the 12th week, a card arrived. Not from my parents, from Darren. 4 sentences. He said Mom and Dad had received my letter. He said they had prayed about it. He said nothing had changed and that if I wanted to come home someday, I knew what that would involve. What it would involve was leaving Marcus. That had always been the condition. I tore the card in half and threw it away and told Marcus what it said, because I had promised him I would always tell him the hard things. He held my face in his hands for a moment and said simply, "Then we don't need them." I believed him more than I had believed it the times before. After that, I stopped doing the arithmetic on how many years it had been. I stopped waiting for something from the Christmas cards I kept sending into silence. I stopped reaching for the phone on Sunday afternoons. What I did instead was turn entirely toward what I had. And what I had was enormous. I had Marcus, and I had Celestine, and I had Rue and Callie, and the cedar box on the counter, and Sunday dinners where everyone talked over each other and nobody went to a garage. I had the particular satisfaction of neonatal nursing, which is the satisfaction of small things surviving against difficult odds. I understood that satisfaction more personally than I had before. I stopped holding anything in reserve for people who were not coming. If there is something you have been afraid to hope for, stay close. Subscribe and share this with someone who might need it tonight. The part where everything turns is right ahead of us, and I want you here for it. Back to it. The call from Darren came on a Tuesday in October, in the 9th year of our marriage. An actual call, not a text, which was the first sign that something had shifted. I almost did not answer. He said, "Simone, I'm calling about Granddad Chester's cabin out on the lake. We're looking at selling the property and the realtor flagged what they're calling a situation with the deed. It's probably nothing, a clerical thing. Our attorney will be reaching out." He said situation the way a person says it when they need to introduce a problem before they can see your reaction. I asked him to tell me what he meant by a situation. He said he didn't fully understand the details and that the attorney would explain. He said, "Mom is going to call you." I said okay. He said again, "She's going to call." And he added at the end, almost as a footnote, "Just try not to make this hard, Simone. After everything, this would be a good chance to be helpful to the family. Don't make this hard." As though the last 9 years had been a misunderstanding I was personally keeping alive. I told Darren I appreciated him calling and that I would look forward to hearing from the attorney. I hung up and called Marcus's cousin Trey, who had been a real estate attorney in Nashville for 11 years. I gave Trey the address of the lake cabin outside Harlan. I gave him Chester Hartley's name and the county. I asked him to look at whatever had been flagged on the deed and call me back. He called me the next evening. He said, "Simone, your grandfather added you to this property in March of 2019. He filed a transfer on death deed, naming you as a 50% beneficiary alongside your father's existing ownership. It's county recorded. It's legal. It has been sitting in that county office for 6 years and no one told you about it. When Chester died, you became a half owner of that cabin. No one can sell that property without your signature." I was quiet for a moment. Tree said, "The cabin has been appraised at $316,000. Your share of a sale, after standard fees, would be approximately $158,000. I said, "What if I don't sign?" He said, "Then the sale cannot proceed. You have a legal right to that property, and nobody can transfer title without your consent." I sat with that after we hung up. I sat with the image of Chester Hartley at his kitchen table in March of 2019, 2 years before he died, 2 years after his only granddaughter's wedding that he had not been allowed to attend, making a quiet, private decision that he told no one about and filed with the county recorder like a letter he was mailing to the future. He could not fix his son. He could not change my mother. But he could put my name on a document that would outlast all of them and say, without drama, without a raised voice, that I had not been forgotten, that I was still his. My mother called the next morning. Her voice had the specific texture of careful that I recognized from childhood, the register she used when she wanted something and had decided that warmth was the most efficient route to it. She said she had been thinking of me. She said she hoped the girls were well. She said it the way you would say it to someone you had spoken to recently, not someone you had not spoken to in years. Then, she said she imagined Darren had mentioned the little situation with the property and that she hoped we could handle it like family. She called it a little situation. She called it paperwork. She said she hoped I could just come and sign so they could get this taken care of. I told her I had asked my attorney to look into it. She went quiet for one moment, not long, a recalibrating moment. Then she said she hoped it would not have to get complicated. She said Granddad Chester had just wanted what was best for everyone and that this was surely just an oversight. I said I would be in touch through my attorney. I ended the call. She showed up that Saturday. I was in the kitchen when the knock came. The girls were in the yard, and Marcus was at the hospital, and the house was quiet in the good way it gets on Saturday mornings. The knock was deliberate, patient, a kind that knows it will be answered. I knew who it was before I opened the door. My mother and my father and Darren, standing on my porch in their good clothes. The clothes people wear when they want to look reasonable. My mother was holding a small wrapped package, a box of chocolates from a shop in Harlan, as though this were a social call. Darren stood behind her with his hands in his pockets. My father stood behind both of them, looking at the porch boards. I stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind me so the girls could not hear. My mother said my name. Her eyes were already wet. What followed was the strangest kind of sales pitch I have ever witnessed, and I have written grant proposals for a living. My mother opened with the material of family. Blood is blood. Time heals things. She used the word reconcile 3 times in 4 minutes, which told me the word had come up in preparation. In some kitchen conversation where they had worked out the argument in advance. She said she missed me. She said the girls deserved grandparents. She said she hoped we could find a way through, together, because she was not getting any younger, and neither was Earl, and life was too short. I let her finish. I have learned that letting people talk is the most useful thing you can do when you need to know what they actually want, because the actual want always arrives eventually. Darren took over next. He said, "Look, we know about Granddad's decision with the deed. We know you've seen an attorney." He said attorney the way some people say it, with a slight chill, as though consulting one were an act of aggression in itself. He said, "We're not asking for anything unreasonable. We're asking you to sign over your portion. In return, the family opens the door again. The girls can have grandparents. Isn't that worth something to you?" There it was. Not reconciliation. A transaction. Sign over $158,000 of legally documented property in exchange for access to a table that should never have been taken from me. I looked at my mother. She was watching my face for the answer. Her expression was the expression of a person who had convinced herself this was reasonable, who had built an internal case for fairness that happened to cost her nothing and cost me everything. And I thought about Chester Hartley at his kitchen table in 2019. 81 years old. Calling me every birthday from the store phone so the bill would not show up. Sending a wedding card that said the only thing that matters is whether he is good to you. Finding one quiet legal way to tell me the truth of what he believed, and then dying without being able to hand it to me himself. I looked at my mother and I said, "Do you know why he changed that deed?" Her face did something I had not seen it do before. Not quite guilt, not quite grief. The expression of a person who knows the answer to a question and knows the person asking also knows it, and there is nowhere left to stand. I said, "He couldn't come to my wedding because of this family. He called me on birthdays from the store phone because you would have seen it on the house bill. He spent the years he had left managing everyone's feelings about a decision I made that had nothing to do with any of you. And he found one way, one quiet, filed, notarized, recorded way to tell me I was still his. That is what that deed is. That is not a clerical oversight, Mom. That is the last thing he ever did for me." My mother's eyes filled. These tears were different from the ones at the door. I could see the difference. These were real. She was in them, not performing them. My father took one step forward. He had not said a word since they arrived. He had occupied his usual position behind my mother, inside the decision she was making, where he had stood for the entirety of my childhood. But he took a step forward and he said my name. His voice cracked on it, the same place it had cracked on the store phone call 9 years ago. He said, "What I did," and then he stopped. He tried again. "What I should have," and then he stopped again. The sentence sat unfinished in the October air. What I did. What I should have. The rest of it too heavy, after 63 years of practice at saying nothing, to be lifted now. He looked at my mother, the way he had always looked at her. And then he looked at the porch boards again, and he stepped back to her side. He chose her. He would always choose her. And for the first time in 9 years, I did not feel angry about it. I felt something nearer to grief. Because living 63 years beside someone who is wrong and staying quiet about it is its own kind of sentence. He had paid for his silence. I just had not been able to see the bill from where I stood. I did not comfort him. I did not tell him it was all right. It was not. My mother collected herself. The real tears went back behind the professional composure, and she said, "Simone, we're your family." "Please," I said, "I know what Granddad Chester wanted when he changed that deed. And I know what you're asking me to do with it. Those are two different things, and I am going to honor one of them." She opened her mouth. I said, "Through my attorney." Then I reached into the pocket of my jeans and I held out the card. Chester's card. The one from the wedding, in his handwriting, that I had carried in my wallet for 9 years. I held it out so she could see the handwriting, so she could see the date, so she could remember that he had found a way to reach me even when the people around him had decided not to. She looked at it. Her face did the complicated thing again. She did not take it. I put it back in my pocket. I opened my front door and walked inside and closed it without a sound. No slam. A slam is something you do when you still have something to prove. I did not. Through the kitchen window I could see the yard. Rue was pushing Callie on the swing we had hung from the big tree. Neither of them had heard a word of it. That was the only thing I had wanted to protect, and I had protected it. The sale closed on a February morning, which happened to fall on Callie's 9th birthday. We had cupcakes at the kitchen table with Celestine before Marcus and I drove downtown to sign the paperwork. Celestine had written Callie's name on the cupcakes in purple icing and sung to her in the kitchen in the voice she reserved for songs, which was big and warm and slightly off-key and perfect. The property had sold for $314,000. My share, after standard fees, was $149,000. Trey had handled every document. I had not spoken to my mother or father or Darren since the Saturday on the porch. Our attorneys had spoken. That was how it had worked. That was how it stayed. At the closing table, after the documents were signed, Trey handed me a file folder. He said, "This was attached to the original recorded deed when Chester filed it. Notarized and county recorded the same day. I don't know why it didn't come to light sooner." He paused. Maybe no one went looking. The envelope had my name on the front in Chester's handwriting. I opened it right there at the conference table, which was not the composed thing to do, but composure has limits. Inside was a single handwritten page, dated March 14, 2019. It said, "Simone, I am sorry I could not come to your wedding. I am sorry for many things I did not have the courage to say out loud while I had the time to say them. I want you to know that I believe you are still the same girl who sat on my porch when she was 9 years old and told me she was going to be a nurse one day, and I was proud of her then and I am still. I don't know if this will ever matter to you or if it will ever reach you. But I wanted something to be on the record. Your grandfather, Chester Hartley." I sat with that for a while. No one rushed me. Tree passed a box of tissues across the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who has seen this before. I took one. Then I signed the remaining documents in my own name, Simone Dawes, and I took the folder home. I put Chester's letter in the cedar box that evening, between Marvel's biscuit recipe and a sweet potato pie card in a handwriting I didn't recognize. That seemed right. A letter from one good person who found a way to show up, stored among the recipes of a family that had made showing up the whole point. The $149,000 went into 2 accounts I opened the following week. One with Rue's name on it. One with Callie's name on it. Named accounts, with statements that went to me, so that no child of mine would ever face the arithmetic of choosing between a person they loved and the security a family is supposed to provide. What I kept from all of it was not the money, though the money was real, and it mattered. What I kept was the letter. And what the letter settled for me was something I had been circling for 9 years without being able to put words to it. Love that does not announce itself is still love. Chester could not change the people around him. He could not show up at a wedding. He could not pick up a phone without hiding it. But he put my name in a county record, and he wrote a letter, and he had it notarized, and he filed it away, and he waited, believing that someday, somehow, it would reach me. It reached me. That is the whole story. Celestine comes for Sunday dinners most weeks now, the way she always has. Rue calls her Grandma Celestine. Callie, who is 9 now, and precise about things, calls her Celestine unless she wants something, in which case she calls her Grandma until she gets it, and Celestine allows both. Some Sunday mornings Celestine brings the biscuits, and some Sundays I make them from Marvel's recipe card, and the cedar box sits on the counter the way it has for 10 years, holding what it has always been holding. The recipe box that Marvell pressed into my hands at a wedding where half the people who should have been there were not, that box has been in this kitchen for every year of our marriage. It held the biscuit recipe, and the pie card, and the handwritten notes in 4 different hands going back to 1963. Now it holds Chester's letter too. A letter from a man who loved me quietly and accurately and recorded it with the county, which is the kind of love that compounds over time. That is what family turned out to be. Not the people who shared my blood. The people who left a record. The people who showed up on the page, on the calendar, at the door, in the kitchen. The ones who were there when it was not convenient and cost them something and they came anyway. Those are the people who get to sit at my table. Those are the people who get to stay. That is my story. One grandfather who filed a deed because it was the only door still open to him. One grandmother-in-law who pressed 60 years of her family into a cedar box and handed it to a stranger at a wedding, because she had decided the stranger was family now. And 2 daughters who will grow up knowing that love is not measured in blood. It is measured in presence. In showing up. In the willingness to put something on the record even when no one can guarantee it will be received. If someone in your life is showing up quietly and consistently, tell them today that you see it. Before the only way they have left to reach you is a letter filed with a county clerk. If this story reached you tonight, share it with someone who needs it. Leave 1 word in the comments, 1 word for what Chester's letter meant to you, and I will know. Subscribe, if you have not. Take care of the people who keep showing up for you. I will see you in the next one.